This tree is from my series called The Ancient Ones. I found all these wonderful distorted trees out in the environment, and I exaggerate them and bring out their unusual qualities in this series of drawings. Eventually the drawings also become paintings, but I start out with these very large graphite drawings on panel, which is a very fun surface to work on. It's a wonderful surface for getting lots of deep, deep blacks, and I love to exaggerate the distorted qualities of the trees. I'm not quite sure what I'm trying to say with that, but I think it is about the whole mysterious, ancient side of the world that trees take us back to. And this series, most of the beginning trees, of course, are here in New Mexico, but I expect to travel around the country and do different interesting trees that I've seen in different parts of the country. And I'm particularly interested in virgin forests and virgin trees. I think they're very magical and have a quality that we don't see very often anymore in our culture unless we go to very special places. The paintings that I'm doing are more like, based on these, are more like drawings also. And they're inspired by my working on copper plates with my printmaking work. We have a very large intaglio press that we purchased that we're doing very large-scale prints on, but all that scratching on the copper with the hard ground and dry point, etc., made me start to think about, well, a lot more about drawing. So everything I do now is really, even though I'll call the paintings, they're really more like drawings. They're watercolor underneath, and then I work in oil pastel and then scratch back through to the watercolor underneath. So they're actually very sophisticated scratch boards. And this one, actually what I have in mind is a mask of a sea god that I saw. And that will be underneath as an imagery. And then I'll lay the oil pastel on top and scratch through to create this tree image on top of it again. So it'll have a totally different quality than the drawing, than this graphite drawing does. For years I've had a fascination with combining abstraction with realism, and this new body of work, I think I'm finally doing it in a way that I consider successful. So right now I'm trying to really, this drawing is kind of in its mid-stage. I haven't finished the complete drawing, and I'm trying to really darken, bring in some of the darks and lights that make the drawing much more dynamic. Obviously with the trees, the changes are much more subtle, so I'm not so much looking at where they are in their life cycle, but capturing their own uniqueness. This particular tree, actually, I found in Truchas, New Mexico, and I'm labeling all the trees based on where I found them. For instance, the first tree I did was called Abiquiu because I found it up in Ghost Ranch in Abiquiu, a wonderful twisted juniper tree. This one, I'm assuming, is a willow tree, but it's been pruned in a very strange way, so it's gone all different odd directions. And I think that's kind of a metaphor for each of us and how we're pruned through our lives and what direction we take with that. I'm working with both pencils, which are graphite, and also solid graphite, which is what this is, which makes very, very wonderful, deep, dark, mysterious blacks. And I think that's what I really like about the tree forms, is you can get lost in these magic sort of niches that they have inside of them, in the black, deep, dark areas and the bright areas and the light falling on them. The first one I did, Abiquiu, actually came out looking like some kind of a character from a fractured fairy tale or something. I really loved reading when I was, well, I still love reading, but I particularly loved it when I was a young child and was really into magic and things like that. And the tree started having all these forms emerging out of it, and everyone that sees it, it's funny, they'll see different characters and creatures and other things in it, and I feel like there's a wood nymph or something hidden in that Abiquiu tree. This one obviously has a totally different feeling to it, but it has its own unique sort of, it's kind of like looking at clouds, and everyone has their own interpretation of what they're seeing in the clouds. So I really like that aspect to my work, where people can find their own pivot to relate to. Sometimes I find myself in the middle of something very strange, like choosing this willow tree, and then I realized how many branches, how insane it is, all of the detail in this. But I get lost in it. Actually, my intensive drawings started with a series that I call the Staghorn series. I became fascinated with these wonderful convoluted forms of staghorn ferns at Selby Botanical Gardens in Florida when we lived there. And I started a whole series of drawings based on the life cycles and aging of the staghorn fern, or what I perceived as the aging cycle, but what seemed like youth to me, middle age, old age, the fragility of old age, etc. And then I did a whole series of what I call my drawing paintings based on them, just as I'm doing with these trees. And that started this whole idea of taking a very elaborate drawing of something and then doing various interpretations on that theme. But the staghorns were all about the life cycle of aging, as I experience it in my own life and as we all experience the changes that happen in our bodies, but reflected instead in the staghorn fern. This tree series will probably be a lifetime exploration. I can see this being one of the kinds of series that will never end. I'll always find new inspiration and a different way to interpret it. Old trees which have been affected by the environment, by their age, twisted shapes by some of them, like Truchus, I believe is a willow tree, but it's the strange pruning that they seem to like to do in New Mexico that's made that tree so interesting. So it's also the aging of the tree, but then the hand of man influencing the trees and how they grow and change. I find it interesting, actually, how some of the same themes have come through my work. For instance, I was always fascinated by cabbages. I don't know why, and those staghorn ferns certainly have that quality. This is an abstract, actually it'll be the background of this piece I'm working on. I'm doing all these really realistic drawings on panel and then working with them abstractly in the next version. So there's a very detailed drawing, which is a piece on its own, and then these abstract interpretations of each one of the realist drawings. On the staghorn, sometimes I did many interpretations of the same drawing. This series, the ancient ones, the series of trees I'm doing from all over the country, and possibly at some point all over the world, I'm just doing one interpretation of each one. This gives me a chance, this work in oil pastel, to explore abstraction in its pure sense, and then, as I scratch through, to integrate the realism into it. I started out doing trees actually years ago with a shagbark hickory that I saw on a beautiful farm near where we lived in western Pennsylvania. That was a very, very realistic watercolor. And then after that, some years later, I went to a place called Blackwater Falls in West Virginia and did a whole series of pastels of this incredible virgin hemlock forest, which had flooded a number of times, so a lot of the tree roots were exposed. It was just an incredibly primordial place. And now I see myself going back to this whole series of trees.